Welcome, everyone, to the Just in Time Cafe. I'm Elizabeth Swan, co-founder of the Just in Time Cafe. Tracy O'Rourke, the other co-founder of the Just in Time Cafe, is joining us today. You got two co-owners, and I'll be your moderator today. And if you have never been to the cafe before, you are so in for a treat today. Today's webinar, a first, is Salsa and Standard Work, Why You Need Recipes and How to Write Them, presented by the one and only Hugh Alley. So let me tell you a little bit about Hugh Alley. He is president of First Line Training, a company that helps organizations achieve significant operational gains in 3 to 6 months by building the skills of managers and frontline leaders. An industrial engineer, Hugh has worked mostly in manufacturing, but also in the public sector, healthcare, and education. He has run 3 manufacturing and distribution firms and taught core supervisory skills to over 1,000 frontline leaders. He's written 2 books, Becoming the Supervisor and the hot off the press, the TWI Memory Jogger. That's TWI stands for Training Within Industry. Another great resource. He speaks frequently about supervision, quality, lean manufacturing, Toyota Kata, and training within industry. Based near Vancouver, Canada, he helps clients across North America. Oh my goodness, welcome, Hugh.
It is so nice to be at the cafe, Elizabeth.
Woo! So a few housekeeping notes before we begin. You can ask questions anytime by entering into the chat area. There's also a Q&A area, but we'll be using the chat. I'll keep an eye on that. Tracy and I will both keep an eye on it in case stuff goes in there that we don't see. But feel free to put stuff in the chat. This session will be available for free on the Just in Time website by Monday. So I know there's some folks that wrote me that they were very bummed not to see this live because there's nothing like live. But we always post the Monday and the following week. So please join us for our first activity, as you have been, by sharing where you're from. So you guys are registering from all over the world. We've got Canada and France, I know for sure. Just so keep typing, let us know where you're from. And Tracy, what are you seeing here?
I see lots of people. Hey, Mike Osterling just joined. Gemma Jones just joined from the
Gemma
UK.
Jones.
Yay! Hi, Gemma.
Scott Winter, Orange County. Laura from Burlington. Tina from Ontario, Canada. We have Christine from Denver. Laurel from Seattle. Carrie from Dallas. Kaylin from Kennewick, Washington. Brian from Vermont. Chris from Ottawa.
Look at that. Russell from Wisconsin, he says it's the great land of cheese.
My husband still talks about the 5-year aged cheddar I brought home from Wisconsin 7 years ago.
Hopefully in a good way.
Yes.
Okay. So before we get rolling with Hugh in the kitchen, we're just going to tell you what's coming up next month at the cafe. And that is going to be a webinar by none other than Stephanie Oliver, and she is presenting Stay Focused, right? She uses lean thinking to go from overwhelm to flow. And that one is, we're looking forward to that one. So a little bit about it. She says, do you ever feel swamped by the demands of the day? Does the overwhelm take over your reality at work or at home? It can get better, right? By understanding flow, how to set limits, you'll be able to create a better daily process and you can overcome overwhelm. So she applies lean thinking and the scientific mindset to everyday life to uncover simple ways to manage your day as a flow system in order to stay focused. She's got a book coming out about this. So she's creating, we call them portmanteau words, those like spork or skorts, right? Put 2 words together. So she's coining a new one, which is focused. So she's got 4 key elements to create a better daily flow. I am looking forward to that one. And the other thing to remind you of, and I'll put links to that in the chat momentarily, is our podcast. The latest podcast is out, and that one It takes a look at the lean IT side of UC San Diego's Process Palooza, where I believe Tracy O'Rourke was a headliner yesterday, Miss Fix-a-Lot. We needed a still of you in your boxing stance, Tracy. That thing was so unbelievably iconic. Thanks, guys. And yes, Renee says, yes, she was the headliner, right? So yeah, Process Palooza was awesome. You got some more. Tracy Rock says, Mike Osterling, we have it. You heard it here, folks. Tracy is a star. We knew that already, but now we know more. All right, so back to Chef Hugh, man. Chef Hugh in the Alley kitchen. We are ready for you, Hugh, to take it away, man.
Well, thanks so much. And so delighted to have everyone here today. I am hoping that I can do three things today. One is that I want you to leave understanding how crucial it is to have standard work in place for you to be able to do ongoing improvement in your work. The second is I want to show you a simple tool that will really help you develop useful standard work. And I think I'm going to help you learn how to make a pretty good salsa. But no doubt you'll have your own preferences and you'll make it better in your own kitchen when you finally get there. But let's start by talking about recipes. So why do we have recipes? Well, my mom, growing up, made the most amazing hot cross buns every Easter. And when we had our family, that became kind of the thing my son and I did together every Easter, is we'd make these hot cross buns. But we only did it once a year. So the only way we could remember it with any certainty was to have the recipe that we'd written out from a very long phone call with my mother. And we still make that recipe today, although I haven't made it with my son for a few years. The other kind of place that, so it's that once in a while thing where you have a recipe and it's really nice to be able to not have to remember it by heart. The other place that we use recipes a lot for is when we're entertaining. And well, there are a few Jamie Olivers out there who just understand food and how to cook without having a recipe, but that's not me. And so if I'm entertaining and I want it to actually work and taste okay for my guests, recipes are what I turn to. And so whether it's vegan vegetable curry or cheesecake or hot cross buns or some fish dish, recipes are what I rely on. And the thing about recipes is fundamentally they let us duplicate something that we like to reliably reproduce them. And the big thing that they do for us is that they eliminate variation, right? They help us do it consistently. So how does that connect to our workplaces? Well, I think all we need to do is consider the range of ways that variation gets into work. So there can be individual variations when a person does it multiple times. They may not do it the same way every time. It's kind of like, some people, when they brush their teeth, they have a very fixed pattern for how they brush their teeth. And it's that you can set your clock by the process. But other people, it just seems kind of random. They probably get all their teeth, but it's a different pattern every time. And that's pretty common. It's very common in the workplace. So you can have inconsistent procedures by one person. You could have multiple people doing a task. Think about different shifts, or if you've got multiple machines doing the same thing. You can have new workers who bring their own experience with them. You can have new technology, new processes, even new products coming in, or think about what happens if you've got a new ingredient that behaves a little differently, and now you've got another variation. If we're going to eliminate variation and deliver our products or services in a consistent fashion to be able to have them look and feel the same every time, to be able to deliver them on time reliably, we need the equivalent of a recipe, and that is standard work. So what exactly is standard work? Well, there are three things about it. It is the current best known way that's documented. And so all three of those pieces need to be there. Needs to be the current way. So this is not the paper that someone's got tucked in the bottom of their desk or behind their machine that they refer to, that was the memo that came out 3 years ago. It's the current way. It's the best known way. It's not my favorite way. It's the best of all that we know. What's the best way? And it's documented. It's written down so somebody else can find it and use it and make sense of that knowledge. I'd like to give you an example of the kind of variation I'm talking about. So I was working with a company that made a nutraceutical ingredient. They were extracting the enzymes from a particular specific organ from an animal. And their problem was that the yield they were getting varied tremendously. Now, they made money as long as the yield was over 1%. But they were getting batches with ranges from 0.75% to 1.5%, and they didn't know why the variation was happening. And that was costing them a lot of money, probably $1 million a year. This is a small company, not in revenue, in profit, because of the variation. So we started looking at it. And I want to show you this graph. This shows there were 9 steps in the process. And this shows you the range of process times at each of those processes. So the first process in this thing took anywhere from 1 to 6 hours. But look down along the way, you got somewhere the range is 7, even 13 or 14 hours difference for what is fundamentally the same process. We started looking into, well, why does that happen? And it turned out that the operators had no instruction about how long they were supposed to run these different processes. So of course there was variation. There was tribal knowledge and all sorts of things. Well, not very helpful. And obviously getting them onto something more stabilized, more consistent was critical for them to start realizing sustained and consistent yields. So I'm sure you've all run into something like that in your own organizations. And to address this, companies come up with some kind of recipe, and they give it many different names. So you'll have heard standard operating procedures or SOPs, standard work, job instructions, work instructions, and no doubt you know 3 or 4 other variations of how these are called. But they all amount to some kind of documented recipe for doing the work correctly. The problem is that if the instructions aren't very clear, then they tend to not be very helpful. And, excuse me, and we tend to underestimate how complex even the apparently simple work is. And this is where we're going to turn to salsa because it's a great way to illustrate. So Elizabeth or Tracy, can one of you put the link to the salsa recipe into the chat?
The PDF
Oh,
went
it's a
out.
PDF.
Everyone's got that. And then
Okay.
there's a link for anyone that can't access through Dropbox.
Okay, awesome. So, this is the recipe that we're working with today. And here in my kitchen, you can see we've got all the ingredients laid out. But obviously, having the ingredients list isn't enough. We need to know the sequence and what we do with them and quantities. Now, I chose this recipe because it's very easy. There's not a lot of steps in it, apparently. But even with it being so apparently simple, it turns out this recipe has a lot of drawbacks. And I'm going to walk you through a few of the problems that I had to overcome as the lowly kitchen worker. And I hope that you will see how critical it is to define your standard work well. So I'm doing only half the batch of what's in the recipe because there are only 2 of us in our household, and frankly, we couldn't consume 3 cups of salsa in a week. So let's go through the ingredients list. Tomatoes. So they give us the option of fire roasted tomatoes or fresh. Now, this is what the fire roasted tomatoes look like. They're soft and squishy because they've been roasted. This is a very different texture from fresh. So in the very first ingredient, we now have 2 very different products that are going to get generated, depending on what we use. And it's not that one is good or bad, but if you're trying to reproduce it reliably, you cannot interchange these things. Then the next element is a medium onion. So I think I have an idea of what a medium onion is. But even when you buy your 3-pound bag of medium onions, there's a range of sizes, but we'll just go with, as long as it came out of that bag, it's the right sort. And then they say chopped. What does chopped mean? Well, this is chopped. But if I take a bit of onion, that's chopped too. And that's going to give you a very different texture and distribution of onion in your salsa. I'm not sure which is better or worse, but they are going to be different. Well, then we have to move on to garlic. Well, I've got 4 different garlic cloves. These came out of our local grocery store. They're very different sizes. And if I take these and say, well, that's the small and that's the large, this is the medium. But if you've ever seen a Russian onion, these are all small cloves out of a Russian garlic. So we'll take 1. Now, if you look on the recipe, you'll notice that it says 2 teaspoons minced. Does that mean we're supposed to mince the garlic? Well, or is it just trying to give us an idea of how big that medium clove of garlic is? The interesting thing is when we get to the recipe itself, it says take the garlic, put it in the blender, and pulse the garlic to cut it into small bits. But if it's minced, what? Like, all of a sudden, I am this poor worker faced with, I don't know what to do. Or it's stupid. What was my boss thinking? Saying, well, cut it, mince it, and then put it in the blender and cut it into small bits. What? But this is the problem with getting the recipe right. Oh, and then there's the jalapeno pepper. So, is this a medium jalapeno pepper? I don't know much about jalapeno peppers. They're not a big part of my diet. I'm hoping it's the case, and I'm aiming for a mild salsa, so I took out the seeds and the membranes. But well, wait a minute. If I'm supposed to have the garlic minced before it goes in, do I really want to put this in whole? Or do I want to maybe cut it into some smaller bits before it goes into the, again, I don't know which is right. If I'm the worker, I'm going to make it up. I'm going to make a choice. And it will take me less or more time. And if you're wondering where the variation in your time is to produce these things, there you are. Oh yeah, I forgot. Do you think we should wash our vegetables before we put them in? And if we're going to wash them, what do we wash them with? Just like the hand soap that's on my dispenser in my kitchen, or do I need to get the special vegetable wash stuff? And then there's the cilantro. Well, this is about a third of a cup, almost half a cup of cilantro. But, you know, I can press this down and make it a quarter cup. So how much is that? I don't know. It is cilantro, I know that. If you're trying to make a repeatable recipe, why would you give the operator the choice of 1 or 2 limes? Because what's going to happen, I mean, if you're putting this recipe out there, it's going to taste really different. The other thing that's going to happen is you're going to run out of limes because your ERP system is ordering them on the basis of using 1 lime, and you've given the choice to the operator of 1 or 2, and sometimes they put 2 in. And now you've run out of limes and you're going to make salsa without any lime. So think about training a worker to make salsa. All of these variations that I've been going, this is a simple recipe, folks. And all these variations, these things that are unknown that I have to sort out as a worker. All of those interpretations are legitimate. But the workers need management to tell them what actually the customer wants, because they don't have a phone line that they can phone up and call a customer. Because otherwise, what we're going to wind up with is a wildly inconsistent product or service. I hope you can see by now that just in this ingredients list of this simple recipe, there are so many questions, and I challenge you to go back to your organization or organizations you work with and look at their instructions. I cannot remember going into a place and finding instructions so clean that I knew exactly what to do. Just have not found them. They may be out there, but mostly you will find stuff where it's unclear or incomplete. And every one of those points of variation messes up your operation. They make it harder to know how long it will take to produce. It makes it harder to know how much inputs you need to buy. It makes it harder to reproduce the quality. It makes it harder to know your costs. It makes it harder to train people. And it makes it harder to implement changes when you decide that there's a better way. Well, enough talk about ingredients. Let's do the best we can. Let's follow the instructions and put the salsa together. Oh, run into another problem. The instructions, Well, the instructions aren't numbered. Let's start with that. So I'm hoping they're in the right order. But it's not immediately evident that they are, because how long are the tomatoes supposed to drain? Like, if you just take a bunch of these tomatoes and pour them in to drain, I could move them now and they've drained some, but I leave them there another 20 minutes and they'll drain a lot more. And then there's the question of the onion. Well, they've got this whole little thing here about chopping an onion and put it in a medium bowl and cover with cold water. Now, if you've used a cooking onion, that's a really smart thing to do because there's a real sting in cooking onions. But if you've got a sweet onion, it doesn't matter. You don't need to do that. So I'm puzzled already with the instructions that don't make sense to me. Like, you're making me do extra work. Well, I've got sweet onion here, so we're not going to do that. See, I've already veered off from from my instructions. Oh yeah, and then eventually we get to putting it in the blender, and the poor author, I mean, I have to have some sympathy for the author of this, because that author has no idea what kind of blender I have. Well, my wife and I inherited this thing. This is a really powerful blender. It goes. Like, do not get anywhere near it when it's running because it's going to tear everything apart. You could probably run a small car on the motor in this thing. If I pulse it for more than 5 seconds, I have puree, not salsa. So I'm going to start mixing this stuff together. I'm actually, I am just going to, I'm not going to mince this before I put it in the blender. I'm going to chop it into a couple of small bits. I'm going to go on there and I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions to this point. So
Any
questions
questions, go ahead and put them in chat.
yeah.
What do you want to know from Chef Hugh?
So while they're typing in, I am going to add tomato that has been drained. I'm going to add onions. I'm going to add jalapeno. I'm going to add cilantro.
I just have a comment while he's doing that, and that is great demonstration of how something so simple as making salsa can be very complicated for someone without clear instruction. And then, we see people blaming the person, like, why are you, why can't you do this? Because it's just not clear. And
That's right.
there's so many memories, or example going through my head about all these times this happened to people I know or to myself, so yeah, crazy.
And you start thinking about, okay, so what if the person doesn't speak English really easily or can't, has a hard time understanding English or has a hearing impairment?
Absolutely.
Anyways,
so they've got challenges, and then also high turnover, right? Like, there's a lot of places I know there's so much attrition, and they're sort of like told, go figure it out. And they're like, what?
Yeah,
just like you said. I mean, like, you're in the back room trying to make salsa for the first time. Nobody's there to help you. And you're like, it's not going to taste right.
Yeah. So excuse me while I pulse this for a moment or two. Okay. So that's my machine. That was all of 3 or 4 seconds, and it's done. So I'm going to put this is one of my lovely things in my kitchen. This is a bowl with Northwest indigenous designs in the center of it that my wife and I got a little while ago. Just fills our life with beauty, and we love having it in our house. And there we are. We have salsa. But I suspect that for most of you, this isn't really what you think of salsa looking like. It's kind of brown, not red, and it's pretty mushy. And so this is the result of this particular set of choices with a super powerful blender and roasted, as in cooked, tomatoes that don't have the solidity of fresh. And it tastes really good because we've made it before, but it's not actually visually the most appetizing. Anyway, so I take it there aren't any questions coming up, so we'll carry on.
Nope.
Someone wants your blender. Where'd you get it?
I'm sorry?
Someone wants your blender, but you said it was given to you and you didn't buy it. So I guess they're out of luck.
Well, I can, afterwards, I can tell you what it is. Email me and I'll tell you what the blender is. So if we think about, so we've seen the problem. So what do we do about it? Okay, that's the real question, is what do we do about it? So if we think about this from the perspective of someone learning a task, there are, I think, 3 different situations that we need to consider, and the learning requirements are different in each. So let's think, let me list them for you. The first is basic skills. So these are the foundational elements of a task. They're well established and well understood. We just need to get information transferred and skills transferred. We're not at this stage looking for problem solving or troubleshooting. We're just looking for good execution. The second situation is we're looking for skill enhancement. So we're now talking about those special or unusual situations where we want someone to have the skills to address something that comes up, the 1 in 90, 1 in 100, 2 in 100, 3 in 100 times. They're there, they're a real issue. Customers want that stuff, but it's not very frequent. And the third category is the novel situation problem, or where a learner wants to master something on their own. There's something that they have a view for. So the basic skills, what you need there is a really good way to actually teach and reproduce a skill. And for that, I look at the training within industry job instruction module and the methods that are associated with that. And that's where we're going to focus today. If you're talking about that skill enhancement, that occasional situation kind of learning, that's where mentors work really well. The experienced person passing along information. And in the novel situations, or where the learner themselves is trying to define and their learning process, that's where you move into something like Toyota Kata, where you take advantage of that repetitive process. We could think about, since it's opening day today, we could think about this in terms of baseball. So basic skills are like straight throws or a catch, right? how to throw is a well understood skill. The body mechanics are well known. And and the coaches who coach that stuff, they know what to look for and they know how to provide instruction to do that. And that's where something like TWI job instruction is perfect. And as you develop your players, you build on one set of skills after another, right? You don't ask somebody to learn how to do a running catch when they can't do a standstill catch correctly. You don't try and teach them how to do a running throw before they can reliably throw straight and the correct distance, just standing still. Skill enhancement is for the less common situations where experience comes into play. And this is where that mentor role is really helpful. It's the player who knows that knows how to help someone settle down before the team goes out on the field in the ninth inning, right? It is the person who reminds the player about that the opposing batter tends to hit right even more than you'd expect. And for the novel situations where the learner's setting their own objective, like improving the accuracy of their throw, they need a more methodical, systematic way to learn. And for that something like the Toyota Kata, where you've got this repeated, very fast cycle of hypothesis, test, feedback, reflection is super helpful. Today, our focus is on that first level where we're just trying to get somebody to be able to throw straight the correct distance. It's where standard work really helps you. And as I've mentioned, for my money, training within industries, job instruction module is the way to go here. And so what I want to do now is introduce you to a way of thinking about the content of your job standard work that's inherent in that training, the TWI model. And I think if you can just start using this, you'll find that your ability to write instructions for your people will go up pretty dramatically. When you look at most instructions, and our salsa recipe is a great example of it, they suffer from a number of problems. They mix up sequences. In fact, I remember seeing one instruction. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. So it was instruction number 10, and it said, before step 9, do this. And I'm thinking, what? This is step 10. Why are you telling me this after step 9? Anyway, back to the problems of most work instructions. So they mix up sequences, they insert reasons, extraneous data, and they bury key points in a lot of words. So here are so I'm going to share my screen and introduce you to the 3 different types of information. Oh, that's the recipe, which you see. 3 kinds of information. And they are the important step, the key point, and the reason. That's right across the top. So the important step answers the question, what do I do next? The key point answers the question, how do I do it so that it works correctly? And the reason answers the question, why should I do it that way? Why does it even matter? And there are a number of things that you need to get right about each of these. So for the important step, you need to have these 5 elements. It needs to be a logical advance. You need to have it in the correct sequence. you need to omit any elements that someone will pick up by watching, because we don't want to overload them. A maximum of 8 steps. And when you've got options, use the current best known way. Don't give them options. For key points, they need to, there are 3 major things that identify the key points. One is that there are 3 kinds and only 3. The first is safety things related to the step. So as you're doing that step, what do you need to do to make sure you don't damage people or stuff? The second kind of key point is make or break. That is, that's what you need to do to actually have the step complete properly. And the third is tips, tricks, or knack, the things that make it easier. Key points should always be phrased in the positive. And when there are options, use when statements. I'll come back to each of those in a moment. I just want to finish what's the information that's on this page. For reasons, we need to answer the question, why should I do it that way? And there are 3 kinds of things you might have here. A consequence when the point is not followed. So the boiler will blow up if you don't do it this way is a good example. I had one of those one time. Policy or legal requirements. So it may be that this is your company's policy that we do not fire people on a first offense. Or as one of my friends experienced, he worked for a railway. He went onto what is called dark track. So dark track is there are no signals on that piece of track, and so you only enter dark track with permission from the yardmaster. And he went on dark track without permission, and he was fired instantly, because in the world of trains, if you're on a dark track and they don't know, that's a problem. But everyone knew that was the case. And the third thing is at least one reason for each key point. I want to go back to a couple of those bullets under the key point column. I mentioned phrase in the positive. So if any of you have ever done any sports and had lessons or coaches, you'll notice, and your coach has been good, you'll notice that what they do is focus on something you should try to do, not something you should avoid doing. The reality is there are a million ways to mess up an operation. And what you want to do is tell them what's the one thing you want them to do so they get it right. You can't possibly list all the ways that they could screw up. And the third bullet there says, when there are options, use when statements. What we want to do here is make it very clear that in circumstance A, you do X. Not that if something happens, if is like a permissive thing. It doesn't actually require you to do something. So what we want to express things as, when circumstance A happens, execute B. So those are the 3 kinds of information. And those get built into recipes. So what does that look like? Well, here's the recipe for the salsa we just made, written using the job instruction approach. So we've got the job we have the job breakdown for quick and easy salsa. And we have the parts required, and that looks up there, looks a lot like an ingredients list. And then we have the tools and materials that we need. And now we have down here in this main area, why this task is important. Well, if the salsa isn't made this way, it will drip on people's clothes and will be too spicy for most consumers. You're trying to explain why it matters that it be done right. And then we have the 8 steps for the operation. Drain the tomatoes, chop the onions, prepare cilantro, prepare the jalapeno, juice a quarter of a lime, add garlic to the blender, add and blend tomatoes, onions, cilantro, jalapeno, lime juice, and salt, taste and adjust, add as required. And then we have the key points. And here is where we get all those little details that help the person do it right. So drain the tomatoes. Well, use a colander or sieve and do it because it's the easiest way to remove liquid. Keep the juice that drains out. It's a key point because you might need it for thinning in step 8.
Hey, Hugh,
Yeah.
just so you mentioned the step 8, someone asked, is there a reasoning for keeping it to 8 steps?
Yes, absolutely. There are 2 reasons for keeping it to 8. One is it's about as many as anyone can remember, a string of relatively random elements. These are not entirely random because there is sequence to them. But the other is that we're trying to keep it small enough that somebody can learn this in about 15 minutes. Because if it takes any longer than that, it's hard for people to concentrate. And you can usually find a useful task that someone can do that takes about 15 minutes to teach them, and they can get to work right away. Like I had a recent conversation with someone, and they were totally surprised. They were teaching a new person how to, so this person came in as a draftsman, and they were going to teach them how to be a senior designer for a product. The first thing that person had to learn was how to build a bill of material in their particular system. And so in 15 minutes, they were able to teach that because it only had, I think, 7 steps. And they spent the rest of that morning creating bills of material that were needed. And it gave the person practice right away on this micro skill of creating a bill of material. But because it was small enough, it could be learned quickly and the person could be set to work doing useful work. Think about if you had to learn a 4-hour operation all at once, you simply couldn't retain it. So what we're looking for is little building blocks. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Good. So, and then we just go through each of these. There are key points. So I'm chopping onions. I want them a 1/4 inch. And I want them that for the good texture. In cold water for 10 minutes after chopping. Removes the sting of the onion. And, oh, I see I made a mistake already here because I had sweet onions as the part required, and I've got this cold water rinse. God, messed up already. But it happens, and you know what? That's okay because these are supposed to be living documents, and you'll discover that, oh, that's a mistake. We'll change that for next time. One little thing more I want to identify for you. Look in step number 4, prepare the jalapeno. You'll notice that the key point there is see table below for spiciness. And that's the table that's over here on the right. where we've got spiciness as mild, medium, spicy, and insane, and what you're supposed to do in terms of how much jalapeno to add. So if you're a company that's making 4 different levels of spiciness, this is the way you have a single job instruction or job breakdown, whatever your SOP, and you have this ability to vary the product depending on what you're trying to get to. And so it's a very nice little trick. The other thing that's really interesting about this is if you look at this document, it's done, all the serious content about how to do this is done in about 125 words, compared to this, where if you take the instruction side, it's 250 words. So you think about what that means for the instructor and for the learner in terms of absorbing the material. It's a whole lot less difficult for the learner to retain this. And frankly, it's a lot easier for the instructor to present the material when it's laid out this way. So this is a tool that you can take and use right away. Even if you just divide the information into the important steps, key points, and reasons, and put it in 3 columns and do nothing else, it'll make a huge difference for you. One of your questions is going to be, well, so what? So does it really make that much of a difference? Let me tell you 3 stories that will give you an idea of how much difference it can make. And then we'll start wrapping up. A company that washes linens for hospitals had a quality index of 55%. They started using this approach to teaching their people. And in 6 months, their quality index went up to 85%. And they were saving $1,000 a day in their processes. A company that makes fish tags. So these are small, round cylinders filled with some very complex electronics that allow researchers to track fish in the ocean. And it's a very seasonal business. They started using this approach to instruction with their seasonal workers. It had previously taken them 3 months to bring these people up to speed. With this approach, they could bring a new person on board and have them producing at production rates in a month. It saved them $20,000 a person every year. And the third example is a powder coating operation, which used this concept of standard work to overhaul its changeover process from one paint color to the next. They reduced their changeover time from 16 minutes to 7 minutes, which gave them an hour and a half more production time every shift, because they were doing 10 changeovers a shift. That was a huge gain in production and productivity. So in each case, each of those 3, these companies developed standard work, taught that work to their employees using the TWI method, and got huge gains. The process works. So I'm done in terms of what I'm going to present now. You can learn more in a couple of different ways. One is my book, Becoming the Supervisor, which is the story of a young supervisor who's learning the supervisory skills. And it talks about standard work and instruction in a couple of the chapters. And the other is my more recent book, The TWI Memory Jogger. And if you want to get a hold of me, you can reach me here. And now I'm wide open for questions.
Okay, we got a 4-minute window, but let's see if you can field the 2 that I have for you. One's from Terry. He says, I'm familiar with standard work consisting of content, sequence, timing, and outcome. Would it be helpful to add to the TWI job instruction sheet how long a step should take, or pictures to show what each step should look like when it's complete? That's one question.
Okay, so in terms of the pictures, maybe, but in general, it will be better to do the instruction showing the person, like you're not just handing these standard work pages to the person. And my experience is that most photographs aren't as clear as people think they are. They're clear to the person who took them, but not clear to the learner.
Yeah.
In terms of having the time, if the standard work is developed well, when the person does it correctly, they will do it in the time that is expected. The normal process in the TWI approach of job instruction is that you would teach the person the mechanics to get the skill right correctly. And then at the end, as you start to set them on their own, you would say to them, okay, so now you know how to do it. You are going to get better as you work on it. Our expectation is that after you've made 25 of these, or after you've made 28, 100 of them, or whatever it is, you'll be able to do them at about this rate. And that's how you convey the standard.
Nice. Thank you, Hugh. That was nice. Well explained. This is such a great education. Last question for you from Ryan is, Juice the Lime didn't have key points. Can you share how needed key points are for each step?
So some important steps don't have key points because it doesn't matter how they're done.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't matter, let's not talk about it. It's critical that it is an important step that you juice the lime, because I don't want you putting the whole lime in. But how you do the juicing, whether you use a machine or pull it out with your fingers or just squeeze it in your hand or have a little juicer, doesn't matter.
And you just came up with kind of a nice Hugh Alley truism. If it doesn't matter, let's not talk about it. I think that's awesome. I will take that away as well.
Yeah.
Annie, and such a great just demonstration, Hugh, and really fascinating nuance here. Obviously, a lot of us, and you can tell from the chat, are used to different versions of standard work and how to put together job instructions, things like that. But this was very specific with good reason for why to do it this way. So, and I've shared your sheet with the guide for the 3 steps.
Good.
And there's a few messages coming in. We've got Callan. This was such a great webinar. Thank you very much. Now let's have some salsa. This was totally awesome and insightful. Thank you, Hugh. From Stephanie. Thank you, Molly. Thank you. Yeah, so you're getting some thanks here, Hugh.
That was awesome, Hugh. Love it.
Well, I hope people had a little bit of fun with it. Sorry, I can't share this salsa with you. Throwing it at the phone wouldn't work.
Every time I make salsa, Every time I make salsa, I'm going to think of Hugh. Hugh in his kitchen.
Exactly. So this will post on the Time Cafe on Monday, and everyone enjoy some salsa, and come back to the cafe next month for making salsa without stress, doing it with flow and no overwhelm on your salsa making. And Stephanie, I will send you the PDF. All right, guys. Bye,
Bye.
Hugh. Take care.
Bye, Tracy. Bye, Elizabeth.